The water was murky, smelling of sweat, blood and marsh. At dawn, a Roman legion stopped by the bank of some nameless tributary in Gaul. Behind them, a week-long march knee-deep in mud. Ahead, the unknown. And yet, as Polybius wrote, no soldier dared to enter the river until the signal sounded. Not because they feared the enemy, they feared the mud. Mud that could kill faster than a sword. When tens of thousands of people lived on campaign for weeks, each of them was a source of danger. Sweat, parasites, excrement, rotting food, all of this blended into one smell of death. But the legions of Rome knew how to survive where other armies simply died out. Their weapon was not only steel, but also order. At the heart of this order stood the concept of balneum, a campaign bath. It did not have marble halls as in Rome, but carried the same idea: cleanliness as part of discipline. Water, even if icy, became as much an element of military service as a spear or armor. Imagine, in a camp for thousands of people, ditches, tents, a kitchen were erected, and nearby, necessarily, a place for ablutions. Archaeologists found remains of such baths in Britain and on the Danube. Small stone or earthen rooms with a furnace and pipes through which hot air was driven. But more often, just a river, a bucket and an iron wheel. The Romans called this lutum militis, the soldier's mud, and they fought it daily, not for comfort, but for life. In army regulations from the time of Augustus, it was explicitly stated: a legionary was obliged to wash after a march and clean his body with oil or sand. Oil replaced soap, and sand removed sweat and dust like sandpaper. Such washing, pain, not pleasure, but for refusing it, one could be punished, as for disobeying an order. For if infection were to spread through the camp, the legion would turn into a rotting corpse, unable to hold formation. Caesar himself wrote of instances when diseases mowed down more people than enemies, and yet it was here, by the murky waters of northern rivers, that the Romans created what would later be called campaign hygiene. It did not save everyone, but it did the impossible. It kept the army alive in conditions where every drop of water could become deadly. And when the legion rose with the dawn and moved on, only scorched earth and traces of campfires remained behind it, and the place where water had boiled yesterday. Where other armies left corpses, the Romans left order. But how did they maintain this order when on their shoulders 20 kilograms of equipment, heat, and hundreds of kilometers to the nearest city? And who ensured that every legionary went through the cold river, even if their body ached from fatigue? The marching routine of a Roman legion was like an endless nightmare of dust, smoke and sweat. Each soldier carried no less than 25 kilograms, armor, sword, spear, a 3-day food supply, tools for building the camp. But the heaviest burden was not metal, it was the smell. A mixture of char, sweat, rotting meat and wet leather. This smell haunted the legionaries like a shadow, and did not let them forget that man is merely an animal, allowed to be clean only by order. When the camp was built in the evening, the legate, commander of the legion, first ordered to dig a ditch, set up tents, and then to organize a place for ablutions. Water was part of military discipline. It was no coincidence that Tacitus wrote, "Where a legionary is lazy to wash, there disease begins." Washing, rubbing the body with sand, and anointing with oil became a ritual not of weakness, but of strength. Warriors, dousing themselves with icy water after a day's march, resembled steel statues covered in steam. But cleanliness on campaign, not a luxury, but a weapon. Doctors were called medicus legionaris, military medics assigned to each legion. Their duty was to ensure that soldiers did not contract infections after battles and baths. It was they who demanded from the centurions, commanders of hundreds, to conduct mandatory ablutions even in conditions of cold and fatigue. This seemed like mockery, but it saved the army from epidemics that would have wiped out entire detachments of other peoples. In the absence of soap, the Romans used a strigil, a curved metal scraper with which they removed oil, dirt and sweat from the body. First, the soldier rubbed his skin with olive oil, then scraped off the layer along with all the filth accumulated during the day. This process was not just cleansing, but a punishment for the body. The scraper cut the skin, and the cold water after it felt like boiling water. But discipline demanded endurance. Archaeological findings show that even in remote provinces, legions built the simplest thermae. They had a hypocaust, an underfloor heating system where air from the furnace passed under the floor, creating heat. These mini-baths were found even in Britain, where winter could kill a person overnight. But more often, soldiers made do with rivers and cauldrons. Hot water was heated in bronze vessels and then poured into wooden tubs. A few minutes of warmth, and then the march again. This order astonishes even modern military historians, for a legion numbering 5,000 men moved as a single organism. Every evening they dug trenches, pitched tents, stretched out awnings, made fires, and arranged for ablutions. For all of this, no more than 2 hours. Discipline honed to mechanical automatism prevented chaos from creeping in. And it was precisely for this reason that Caesar's legions could march 25 kilometers a day, maintaining combat readiness for weeks. But the water was not always clean. In the swamps of Germania, in the northern Gaul, or in the sands of Syria, rivers were often contaminated by decay, blood, and remains. Historians report that the Romans used filters made of cloth and sand, and also boiled water, adding vinegar to it. This drink was called posca, a mixture of acid and water which quenched thirst and cleaned wounds. It killed bacteria unknown in those times and saved the lives of thousands of soldiers. The term posca became a symbol of army survival. A soldier who drank it and washed in murky water lived longer than one who sought purity. The Romans understood the main thing was not to avoid dirt, but to make it serve them. They boiled, rubbed, burned, cleaned with sand, transforming the very procedure of cleansing into an act of discipline. But the most astonishing thing is that even during battles, they did not forget about the body. After battle, legionaries washed themselves, cleaned wounds, and massaged their muscles with oil. This was not just healthcare, it was a ritual of returning to humanity. For dirt, blood and sweat blurred the line between soldier and beast, while ablution restored a sense of form and order. Archaeologists found letters from legionaries near ancient Vindolanda on the border of Britain and Scotland, where they complained not about the enemy, but about cold water and the lack of oil. They wrote that without ablutions, the body rots like meat in a pit. These lines sound like the cry of a person who understands cleanliness is life and dirt is death. Thus, the Roman army, step by step, created its system of hygiene, simple yet ruthlessly effective. Where other armies succumbed to diseases, legionaries stood in formation. Water, sand, oil and iron discipline became weapons as potent as the gladius. And it was thanks to them that the empire could march through deserts, swamps and mountains without losing itself to the dirt. But one question remained open. How did this system survive when the legion found itself far from rivers, amidst the sands of Syria or scorching Africa, where there was no water at all? When legions marched through the sands of Syria or across the scorched plains of Egypt, water became a treasure, equal to blood. Under a sun that scorched the earth to whiteness, sweat instantly turned into salt on the skin. The soldiers drank from wineskins made of goat hides, and every sip was worth a life. Bathing was out of the question. And yet, even here where the very earth knew no moisture, the Romans found a way to stay clean. In such conditions they used ash and oil, a strange mixture, but it was precisely what saved them from infections. First, the body was rubbed with oil, then sprinkled with ash obtained from campfires. The mixture absorbed sweat, dirt and grease, and then it was scraped off with a knife or a strigil. This is how the semi-desert version of the Roman bath emerged. Modern archaeologists find remnants of bronze scrapers and vessels with ash in the oases of Egypt, evidence that baths existed even where there were no rivers. Anyone who first witnessed this procedure considered it madness. Legionaries, smeared with a grey layer, resembled reanimated statues. But in this madness lay calculation. Ash acted as an alkali, destroying bacteria. Oil protected the skin from cracks and sunburn. Even in the desert, the body remained capable of battle. A special role in such campaigns was played by aquilifers, soldiers responsible for storing and distributing water. Their name came from the word aqua, water. This was not just a position, but a responsibility for the life of the entire legion. Water was scarce, but distribution was strictly according to norms. A few sips per person in the morning, a few in the evening. Violating the order was punished as severely as desertion. Written accounts from the time of Emperor Trajan tell that in his eastern campaigns, legions built temporary cisterns lined with hides and clay. They collected rainwater in them, then boiled it, adding vinegar, that same life-saving drink, posca. It quenched thirst and cleansed the intestines. Drinking water without vinegar was forbidden. The risk of infection was too great. This simple mixture, water, vinegar and ash, became a symbol of survival. Even under the scorching sun, a Roman had to be clean. He could not afford weakness, for dirt was considered a sign of a barbarian. And this was not just arrogance, but a strategy. A clean body, a strong soldier, a strong soldier, a strong formation, an invincible army. Water was scarce, but the Romans had time. They dug wells, laid leather hoses, created improvised baths from tents. Hot air from campfires was directed under fabrics, creating a steam bath effect. Outside, the desert scorched everything alive, while inside the tent steam billowed, smelling of oil and sweat. Here the body was cleansed and the spirit rested. These campaign baths, the embodiment of Roman stubbornness. Neither heat nor scent, nor the absence of water could break the habit of order. Even if the bath turned into a cloud of dust, it remained a symbol of civilization, for a Roman believed cleanliness distinguishes men from savage, discipline from chaos, the empire from barbarism. And yet, when armies returned from the desert, they brought with them not only glory, but also diseases. Legionaries hardened in the sands faced a new threat, the filth of human settlements, where water stood in wells and diseases awaited every step. How did the Romans cope with this when the campaign ended and the legion entered a city? When the legion returned from campaign, the warriors dreamed of walls, of a roof over their heads, of soft water from the Thermae. But it was in these cities, where everything seemed safe, that a new threat awaited them: stagnant water and the diseases of the crowd. The dirt from which the Romans fled in the desert awaited them in civilization. Livy wrote that, in the cities of the empire, diseases followed the troops like shadows after the sun. Roman cities prided themselves on their baths, enormous complexes where life buzzed, noise, steam, shouts, laughter, conversations about politics and women. But for soldiers, these thermae were not a place of rest, but a test. Their bodies were accustomed to the harshness of campaign cleanliness, where every scraper left a mark and every drop of water had a price. Now they entered marble halls where dozens of people shared one bath, and along with the steam, bacteria rose into the air whose existence the ancients did not know, but instinctively feared. Therefore, the military had a special tradition: balneum militare, a bath exclusively for legionaries. It was located near the barracks, usually on the outskirts of the camp or close to the walls. The same order was maintained there as in the field: ablution, rubbing with oil, cleaning with astrigil, mandatory medical examination. The body was regarded as a weapon, and if a weapon rusted, it needed to be repaired. Archaeological findings show that such military baths had three rooms: cold, warm, and hot. The hypocaust system, under floor heating, allowed for temperature regulation. Stones were heated by furnaces, air passed under the floor and walls, creating uniform warmth. The Romans called these halls frigidarium, tepidarium, and caldarium. 3 stages of cleansing, 3 steps from fatigue to peace. But this was not just hygiene. The bath was a place of military brotherhood. Here, legionaries exchanged stories, treated wounds, and prepared for new campaigns. In the noise of steam and water, the voices of those who would not return from the battlefields could be heard. Cleanliness became a memory. It is interesting that even in imperial times, when legions were stationed on distant frontiers, in Britain, Dacia, on the Rhine, military engineers built full-fledged thermae with furnaces and stone pipes. Their traces are found near Hadrian's Wall, in Vindolanda and Carlisle. These structures are silent proof that cleanliness for the Romans was not a privilege but a necessity. Historians note that thanks to a strict system of hygiene, the mortality rate from diseases in the Roman army was significantly lower than in most medieval armies thousands of years later. In this lies a paradox. Civilization could kill a person faster than a campaign. Where barbarians lived in filth, Romans survived in dust and heat because they transformed cleanliness into a ritual of survival. And yet, even the most perfect system had its limits. When the empire began to crumble, order cracked along with the roads and aqueducts. The thermae emptied, water stagnated, diseases returned. What once kept the army alive became its weakness, for without iron discipline, neither water nor baths could save it anymore. But how and why did the habit of cleanliness, once a symbol of strength, disappear along with Rome itself? And what happened to those who still tried to preserve this order amidst the ruins of the empire? The decline of discipline began not with defeats on the battlefield, but with weariness. Soldiers, accustomed to order, began to see ablution not as a duty, but as a burden. After the death of Marcus Aurelius and the beginning of the 3rd century crisis, Roman legions were increasingly engaged in endless wars, from the Danube to Syria. Cities crumbled, roads became overgrown, aqueducts, which had supplied garrisons with water for centuries, fell into disrepair. Where thermae once bustled, now stood ruins. Historians wrote that legions abandoned on the borders lost not only morale, but also the habit of hygiene. Lice and diseases began to breed in the filth of the camps. Doctors were scarce, oil and vinegar, luxuries that only commanders could now afford. Ordinary soldiers washed in rainwater when the chance arose. Where stone thermae once stood, only pits remained, dug in the earth and filled with murky moisture. Gradually, even words disappeared. The terms balneum and hippocaust began to sound like echoes of an old word. They were replaced by crude practices of survival. Instead of oil, ash. Instead of scrapers, stones. But the main thing disappeared not from bodies but from minds, the belief that cleanliness is part of discipline, and discipline is the essence of Rome. The northern provinces became a symbol of this loss. Archaeologists in Britain and on the Rhine found thermae abandoned in the early 5th century. Everything remained untouched in them. Furnaces with coal, bronze scrapers, jugs with oil residue. It seemed the soldiers simply left and never returned. Perhaps barbarians overwhelmed them, or perhaps they themselves ceased to believe in the order that had recently held the world together. With the collapse of infrastructure, water also disappeared. Aqueducts crumbled, sources dried up. Dirt once vanquished regained power. Diseases decimated cities, and even emperors could not find clean water for bathing. Pliny the Younger wrote about how the filth in the thermae became a symbol of our time. This phrase became prophetic. And yet, even in this grim period, there were those who did not give up. Remnants of old legions, garrisons on distant frontiers, maintained the ritual of ablution. They built small wooden steam rooms, boiled water in bronze cauldrons, rubbed their bodies with sand, as if trying to hold onto the very memory of Rome. For them, cleanliness became an act of resistance, the last sign of belonging to the empire. It was then that a new term was born, balneum militare reducta, reduced military bath. These were small structures designed for dozens of people. They no longer had marble, columns and hot floors, only fire, smoke and the smell of oil. But everyone who entered felt that they were still part of the great machine that once marched through the world. Cleanliness transformed from a routine into a symbol of memory. When the empire finally collapsed in 476, the thermae disappeared with its demise. But along with them, the striving for order did not vanish. It hid in the habits of descendants, in monastic rules that required washing hands and body, in the traditions of knights who cleaned their armor just as legionaries once cleaned their skin. Rome fell, but its idea survived in the most unexpected forms. And yet, one last question remained, which the Romans themselves would ask us. If cleanliness is a weapon, are we capable today of wielding it as they did? When the empire plunged into chaos, it seemed everything disappeared. Roads, the army, law, faith in order, but one image did not disappear. Hot water, steam, cleansing warmth. A symbol that for centuries kept the Romans in formation. Even when the last legions abandoned forts and burned camps, somewhere in the earth, air still whispered in the underground pipes of the old hypocaust. These stone lungs continued to breathe warmth, as if the very memory of Rome refused to cool. Archaeologists tell us that centuries after the fall of the empire, barbarians, Franks, Visigoths, Angles, came to the ruins of the Thermae. They didn't understand how heat could flow under the floor, but they felt power in these stones. Some of them tried to restore the furnaces, to heat water, without even knowing why. In their hands, ancient technology transformed into a ritual, a legacy passed down without words. Thus, the idea of cleanliness outlived those who created it. For the Romans, the bath was not just physical relief, but an act of spiritual discipline. The body was cleansed so as not to surrender to weakness, to endure cold, heat, pain. This was part of military valor. Cicero wrote that cleanliness of the body is a reflection of order in the soul. When the therma disappeared, this inner order also vanished. Medieval Europe would long consider bathing dangerous, unhealthy, even sinful. People forgot that it was cleanliness that saved armies and cities, but the trace of the Roman bath did not dissolve. In Byzantium, military therma survived, and Byzantine soldiers, heirs of the legionaries, still heated water and rubbed their bodies with oil before battle. Later, the Arabs adopted this custom, creating their hammams, descendants of Roman balneas. The idea of cleanliness as a form of strength passed through centuries, changing languages and faiths, but not its essence. Even in northern countries, where the legions never reached, a love for steam, for baths, for hot air emerged, as if an echo of that discipline that once held the world under the sway of one city. Archaeologists found dozens of strigius, oil vessels, furnaces and hypocaust arches in Pompeii and Britain. These finds are not just stones, they speak of a belief that man can conquer nature not with a sword, but with cleanliness, labor and order. Water for the Romans was like fire, it had to be tamed, made to serve. Therefore, even in battle, amidst corpses and blood, legionaries found time to wash themselves. It was their way of telling the world, we are not beasts. We are Rome. When modern researchers compare the survival rates of armies from different eras, the figures are striking. In Roman legions, the mortality rate from diseases was almost twice lower than in armies of the late Middle Ages. Not because of miraculous medicine, but because of the habit of cleanliness. To wash meant to survive. To survive meant to win. But the most important thing in this story is not the technique, but the spirit. The Romans could march through mud and cold, but they did not allow mud to settle within. Their bath was a symbol of self-control, not just control over the body. And when that control disappeared, the empire disappeared with it. Today we live in a world where hot water flows from the wall, and cleanliness seems to be something taken for granted. But this is precisely what makes the Romans' question particularly poignant. Are we ready to pay the same price for order, for discipline, for survival, if everything collapses again one day? Because at the end of this story, it's not the bath, not the empire, and not even the water. At the end, it's a person standing by a cold river, tired, covered in sweat and dust, yet still descending into the water. He knows that tomorrow he might die, but today he cleanses himself, not for beauty, but for strength, for the belief that even amidst dirt, one can remain human. And now, knowing this, it's worth asking yourself, if you stood beside him, in the icy wind, with a sword on your back and dirt under your fingernails, could you do the same? Could you enter the murky water, to prove that you are worthy of being part of Rome?